My name is Serena. I'm 21 years old. And the day my sister's wedding reception collapsed into confusion in front of more than 200 guests, I wasn't anywhere near the venue. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't answering frantic phone calls. I wasn't trying to explain myself. Instead, I was sitting on a quiet hotel balcony in Lisbon, watching the sun melt into the river while my 6-year-old daughter slept peacefully inside. And if I'm being completely honest, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. What I felt was relief. The kind of relief that comes after carrying a burden for so long that you've forgotten what life feels like without it. The kind that arrives when you finally put that burden down and realize you never should have been carrying it in the first place. But if I start with the wedding disaster, you'll probably misunderstand everything. So let me start much earlier. Long before the reception hall went dark. Long before my phone exploded with messages. Long before my sister finally learned what happens when people mistake kindness for obligation. My younger sister Diane is 19. For as long as I can remember, she has been the center of every room. The favorite. The golden child. The one everyone noticed first. Whenever guests came over, her achievements were discussed before anyone asked about mine. Her photographs filled the living room walls. Her birthdays felt bigger. Her problems felt more urgent. Her victories felt more important. And somehow everyone accepted that as normal. Including me. For years, I convinced myself it didn't bother me. Families have roles. That's what I told myself. Diane was the star. I was the dependable one. She received attention. I handled responsibility. Simple. At least that's how it started. The real problems began when money entered the picture. 3 years ago, Diane met a man named Clifford. Everything changed after that. Clifford came from wealth. Real wealth. The kind of wealth that operates in a completely different reality. His family owned commercial real estate across multiple states. They talked about investments the way normal people talk about grocery shopping. They renovated vacation properties. Collected properties. Discussed trust funds over dinner. To them, luxury wasn't special. It was normal. And Diane fell in love with that world almost immediately. Not just with Clifford. With everything that came with him. The status. The image. The lifestyle. The appearance of perfection. Soon, she became obsessed with making sure our family looked like we belonged in that world too. There was only one problem. Me. I didn't fit the image she wanted to present. I was a single mother. My daughter Nora was 6 years old. Her father left before she was born. Since then, I'd built everything myself. Every bill. Every milestone. Every achievement. No shortcuts. No safety net. I also owned a small but successful financial consulting practice. Nothing glamorous. Nothing flashy. But stable. Profitable. And entirely self-made. The irony. None of that mattered. Because whenever Diane introduced me to Clifford's family, she conveniently left those details out. They never heard about my business. They never heard about my clients. They never heard about the years I spent building something from nothing. All they saw was what Diane wanted them to see. A single mother. A rented apartment. A life that looked smaller than theirs. And Diane never corrected that impression. Not once. Then came the phone call. Call that, looking back, should have been my warning. It happened 19 months before the wedding. Tuesday morning. 9 o'clock sharp. My mother's name appeared on my screen. I answered expecting a normal conversation. Maybe she'd ask about Nora. Maybe she'd ask how work was going. Instead, she got straight to the point. Diane needs help. No greeting. No small talk. Just that. I remember staring at my computer screen while she explained the situation. The wedding venue Diane had chosen was far beyond what she could currently afford. A historic estate on the edge of the city. Private gardens. A grand staircase. Crystal chandeliers. The kind of venue people book when they're trying to impress everyone they've ever met. The deposit alone was $12,000. Non-refundable. And somehow, that had become my problem. We need you to put it on your card. The words came gently. But there wasn't really a question attached to them. I asked whether Diane knew she was calling me. Yes. I asked if Diane intended to pay me back. There was a pause. Long one. Then my mother gave me an answer that told me everything I needed to know. "We're family, Serena." That's all she said. 4 words. And somehow those 4 words became permission to take whatever they needed from me. I should have said no. Instead, paid. The venue deposit. Then the catering deposit. Then the florist invoice. Then vendor coordination fees. Then additional expenses that somehow kept appearing without warning. Every few months another emergency surfaced. Another gap needed filling. Another payment required saving the day. And somehow the responsibility always landed in my lap. By the time the wedding approached, I had contributed more than $61,000. $61,000. Not $1 was formally borrowed. Not $1 was acknowledged. Not $1 came with a repayment plan. The money simply disappeared into the wedding machine and became part of Diane's dream. What hurt wasn't losing the money. It was what happened afterward. Nobody talked about it. Nobody thanked me. Nobody even seemed surprised. It became expected. Normal. Automatic. Diane never once sat down and said thank you. Instead, she'd smile and say things like, "I knew we could count on you." Or, "You're always so practical." The way someone compliments a reliable appliance. Useful. Dependable. Replaceable. My mother wasn't much different. Neither was the rest of the family. Everyone knew. Everyone benefited. And everyone chose silence. Because acknowledging the truth would have forced them to confront something uncomfortable. That I was carrying a burden nobody else wanted. One night, my aunt called and told me I was holding the family together. First it sounded like praise. But after we hung up, I sat alone staring at the ceiling. And one question kept repeating in my head. When exactly did I agree to become responsible for everyone else's life? I never found an answer. But a few months later, an email arrived. Single email. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk between client calls when the email arrived. First, it looked harmless. The subject line read, "Wedding weekend logistics. Please read carefully. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Just another wedding update." At least that's what I thought. I opened it expecting directions, parking information, maybe a timeline for the ceremony. Instead I found a list. A carefully organized list of bullet points. And somehow that made it worse. Because this wasn't written emotionally. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a mistake. Every word had been considered. Every sentence had been chosen deliberately. The first bullet point stopped me cold. Nora was not invited. Not to the ceremony. Not to the reception. Not to any part of the wedding. Diane explained that the event would be adults only. She said she hoped I would understand. For a moment I thought that was the end of it. Should have been. But then I kept reading. And that's when everything changed. Beneath the explanation was another sentence. One sentence. A sentence I still remember word for word. Diane wrote that Clifford's family had certain expectations regarding the atmosphere of the event. Then she added something worse. She said that children from unconventional family situations could become a distraction. I read it once. Then again. And then a third time. The office around me disappeared. The sounds faded. The world went quiet. Because suddenly it wasn't about wedding logistics anymore. It wasn't even about an invitation. It was about my daughter. My 6-year-old daughter. A little girl who loved coloring books, spaghetti dinners, and airplanes. A little girl who had done absolutely nothing wrong. And somehow Diane had reduced her existence to a potential embarrassment. Not because of who Nora was. But because of who her mother was. A single mother. An inconvenient detail in the perfect image Diane wanted to present. I turned my phone face down on the desk and stared out the window. For a long time I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just sat there. Because some betrayals arrive so quietly that your heart doesn't know how to react at first. The rest of the email somehow managed to get worse. The next bullet points weren't requests. They were expectations. Financial expectations. Wrapped in the language of family. Diane expected me to cover the remaining balance for the venue. She expected me to pay for additional hotel rooms. She expected me to contribute toward the honeymoon. Every item was written as though the decision had already been made. As though my role was simply to agree. Then I reached the final bullet point. And that was the one that finally broke something inside me. It wasn't about money. It was about me. Diane explained that for the sake of maintaining a cohesive presentation to guests, she would prefer that I arrive separately from the rest of the family. She wanted me seated near the back of the reception hall. Not with relatives. Not near the bridal party. Instead, she planned to place me with some of her co-workers. Then came the final insult. She requested that I avoid discussing my profession with Clifford's family unless directly asked. According to Diane, it might create confusion about our family's financial background. I stared at the screen. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. After everything I had contributed. After every bill I'd quietly paid. After every crisis I'd solved. My own sister wanted me hidden. Not removed entirely. That would have been too obvious. She wanted something worse. She wanted me present but invisible. Useful but unseen. A wallet with a seat assignment. I didn't call her. I didn't call my mother. I didn't send an angry message. Instead, I sat with that email for 2 days. Then I made one phone call. To my attorney. Her name is Patricia. She's handled my business contracts for years. And unlike most people in my family, Patricia dealt in facts, not feelings. I forwarded her the email. Then I explained everything. Every payment. Every agreement. Every financial commitment connected to the wedding. There was one detail Diane had never fully understood. All of those vendor payments had been routed through a trust structure Patricia's firm managed. At the time it seemed convenient. My mother had wanted me behind the scenes. Anonymous. Invisible. I agreed. Now that decision suddenly mattered. Because while my name wasn't attached publicly, the money still was. And so was the authority behind it. Patricia reviewed everything carefully. Then she explained my options. Slowly. Clearly. Professionally. If financial authorization was withdrawn before final payment deadlines, several vendors would be legally entitled to suspend services. The venue itself had a strict clause. Miss the payment deadline. Lose the booking. Simple. No exceptions. I listened. Asked questions. Took notes. Then I thanked her and said I needed 24 hours to think. That afternoon I picked Nora up from school. Like always, she climbed into the car smiling. Talking a mile a minute. Something about a disagreement during recess. Game. Friend. Some childhood drama that was already halfway forgotten. We stopped at her favorite Italian restaurant. She ordered the same pasta she always ordered. And as I watched her excitedly tell stories while twirling noodles around her fork, something became crystal clear. Nora had no idea. No idea that her aunt had written an email explaining why she wasn't welcome. No idea that people viewed her existence as inconvenient. No idea that adults were making decisions about her worth behind closed doors. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do. My decision happened somewhere between the breadbasket and the check. The next morning I met Patricia. We signed the paperwork. At precisely 7:07 a.m. On Saturday morning, the trust's financial authorization was formally withdrawn. The venue, the catering, several major vendors. The wedding itself was scheduled to begin just a few hours later. By then, it was no longer my problem. That same evening I purchased 2 airline tickets. Destination Lisbon. Nora had been talking about airplanes for months. She'd never left the country. Never seen Europe. Never watched clouds pass beneath a plane window. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't spending money on someone else's dream. I was investing in my daughter's happiness. And somehow, That felt better than every wedding payment combined. Over the next 2 evenings, I packed quietly while Nora slept. No drama. No announcements. No explanations. Just a suitcase, passport, and a decision. A decision that finally put us first. The night before the wedding, I drove to the estate one last time. The rehearsal dinner was ending. Guests laughed beneath strings of lights. Champagne glasses clinked. Everything looked perfect. Diane stood near the garden entrance wearing a pale dress. She was smiling, radiant, confident, completely certain that tomorrow would unfold exactly as she'd planned. She never saw me. I didn't approach her. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I carried a small envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. Just one sentence. I hope you receive exactly what you've built. I won't be there tomorrow. Neither will my support. Take care of yourself, Diane. I slipped the envelope into her coat pocket. Then I turned around and walked away. No confrontation. No goodbye. No second chances. Our flight left at 6:40 the next morning. As the plane lifted into the sky, Nora pressed her face against the window, smiling wider than I'd seen in months. And somewhere thousands of feet below us. The moment I switched my phone back on in Lisbon, everything started arriving at once. Missed calls, voicemails, messages. Notifications stacked so quickly that my screen looked frozen. Nora was busy deciding which suitcase she wanted to pull through the airport, completely unaware that an entire wedding was unraveling thousands of miles away. I stood there in arrivals scrolling through the chaos. My mother had called repeatedly. My aunt had left several messages. There were 2 voicemails from a number I didn't recognize. And then there was a text from my mother. Just 6 words. Serena, what did you do? Not a question. An accusation disguised as one. I listened to the unfamiliar voicemail first. The woman on the recording introduced herself as the event coordinator from the estate. Her voice was calm, professional, carefully controlled. But beneath that professionalism, I could hear urgency. She explained that the payment confirmation they had been expecting never arrived. Without verification, they could not proceed with final preparations. She requested that the account holder contact them immediately. I deleted the message. Then I slipped my phone into my pocket. For the first time in years, someone else's emergency wasn't mine. It wasn't until days later that I learned what had happened. Most of the details came from my aunt. She called 4 times before I finally answered. By then, the wedding disaster had already become family history. According to her, the first signs of trouble appeared around 10 o'clock that morning. The venue's event director quietly informed Clifford's mother that there was a hold on the account. First, nobody panicked. These things happen. A missing payment. A banking error. Paperwork issue. Surely it would be resolved. Except it wasn't. By noon, the catering staff stopped setting up. No payment. No service. No exceptions. Questions started spreading through the venue. Staff members whispered. Managers made phone calls. And slowly the atmosphere shifted. The confidence disappeared. The uncertainty arrived. By 1:30, guests had already begun arriving. Yet the reception hall remained closed. No music. No tables. No celebration. Just confusion. That was when Clifford's family began demanding answers. And for the first time, Diane couldn't provide them. Because she didn't actually know where the money came from. Not really. For years, she had described it vaguely. Family support. Family resources. Help from relatives. General explanations that sounded convincing enough when nobody looked too closely. Now people were looking closely. And suddenly vague answers weren't enough. They wanted specifics. Count numbers. Payment confirmations. Proof. Diane had none of it. She called my mother. My mother called her bank. The numbers didn't exist. She called my aunt. My aunt couldn't help. Then cousins. Then friends. Then anyone she thought might somehow rescue the situation. Nobody could. Because nobody had ever been paying for it. Except me. At approximately 1:50 that afternoon, Diane finally found the note I'd left inside her coat pocket. My aunt told me she watched Diane read it, then sit down on a garden bench, and stay there, motionless, for several minutes, as if the reality of everything had finally caught up with her. Nearby stood Clifford. Further away stood his mother. And according to my aunt, the expression on that woman's face wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. What she saw instead was disappointment. Quiet kind. The kind that permanently changes how someone sees you. The wedding never happened. Not that day. Not at that venue. Not at all. The estate exercised its contractual rights and released the booking. The vendors packed their equipment. Guests were informed that unforeseen circumstances had forced a postponement. No further explanation was offered. Because there wasn't one. Not one that could be told honestly. Not one that didn't reveal years of financial dependency, hidden beneath a carefully constructed image. 6 weeks later, Diane and Clifford separated. Quietly. Without drama. Without public announcements. I wasn't involved. I don't know every detail. And honestly, I don't need to. All I know is what my aunt told me. Clifford's family began asking financial questions. Questions Diane couldn't answer. Eventually, that became its own answer. Meanwhile, my phone continued ringing. Day after day. For 11 straight days, my mother called. Most of the calls went unanswered. Finally, on the 12th day, I picked up. I expected anger, accusations, maybe even shouting. Instead, she sounded exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes when something you've been pretending is stable finally collapses. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked a simple question. Why didn't you just talk to Diane? I remember looking out the apartment window, thinking about that email, thinking about Nora, thinking about all the years that came before it. Then I answered. I did talk to Diane. My mother stayed silent. The email was the conversation. Another silence. Then I asked something I'd wanted to know for weeks. Did you actually read it? She hesitated. Then admitted Diane had summarized it for her. And finally she said something that told me everything. She could have phrased things better. Closed my eyes. Because there it was again. The same pattern. The same refusal to see the actual wound. As if the problem wasn't what Diane believed. Only how she expressed it. As if excluding my daughter was a matter of wording. As if humiliation could be softened by editing. I realized then that there was nothing left to explain. No magical sentence waiting to fix everything. So I told my mother I loved her. I told her I needed time. And I told her I wasn't discussing it any further. Then I ended the call. Afterward I waited for guilt. I expected it. I almost thought I deserved it. But it never came. Instead, what I felt was something else. Relief. Not joyful relief. Not victory. Just the quiet relief that arrives when a burden finally leaves your shoulders. Nora and I spent 9 days in Lisbon. 9 peaceful days. We walked along the waterfront. Rode old yellow trams through narrow streets. Watched the city glow beneath us from hilltop terraces. Ate warm custard tarts in the afternoons. Laughed more than we had in months. On the 5th day, Nora asked why we weren't at Aunt Diane's wedding. I looked at her. Then smiled. We needed a trip together. She accepted that answer immediately. Because children don't always need complicated explanations. Especially children who know they're loved. A few seconds later, she was already asking where we were having dinner. And just like that, the moment passed. When we returned home, life continued. My clients were waiting. My calendar was full. The apartment looked exactly the way we left it. Quiet. Comfortable. I never called Diane. And she never called me. Maybe one day she will. Maybe she won't. Either way, I no longer feel responsible for what comes next. The last thing my aunt told me was that Diane had moved back in with our mother. She's trying to rebuild. Trying to sort through financial problems and personal ones. And honestly, hope she succeeds. Truly do. Not because I owe her anything. but because failure teaches enough lessons on its own. What I know now is simple. For years I made myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. I paid bills nobody acknowledged. I stayed silent while others took credit for stability I created. I accepted disrespect because I confused sacrifice with love. Then one day they asked me to erase myself completely. And worse than that, they asked me to treat my daughter like something embarrassing. That was the moment everything became clear. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. Today I'm 34 years old. I have a daughter who never doubts she is wanted. I have a business I built with my own hands. I have a life that may not impress wealthy strangers. But it belongs entirely to me. And that's enough. People still say I ruined my sister's wedding. Disagree. I didn't destroy her wedding. I simply stopped paying for an event I was never truly invited to attend. Those are two very different things. And maybe someday, when enough time has passed, even Diane will understand the difference. If you've ever been the person quietly carrying everyone else's weight while nobody stopped to ask what it was costing you, I'd love to hear your story. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do